Penn State University at University Park. With over 40,000 undergraduate students, you're destined to find people much different from yourself.
I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm from Pennsylvania.
I'm from Pennsylvania.
There's a certain ambiance that comes with higher education, where every group and every idea is represented. Everything is so unique and new and full of culture. Just look around.
Community lives here.
Diversity lives here.
Penn State lives here.
Maybe it's an exaggeration, but even the least ethnically diverse universities are set on proving their levels of multicultural acceptance. Contrary to what the narrator reasoned, most of the people featured were pretty similar, a spectrum of white Pennsylvanians. Affirmative action policies are present in many schools to provide disaffected groups like minorities better opportunities at admittance to college. So how effective is affirmative action? Why is it so difficult to talk about? And what's in store for the future?
Politically, all of this banter on affirmative action started in the year 1941, when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802, banning discrimination in defense industries and creating the Fair Employment Practices Committee. Since then, President Eisenhower, Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Nixon contributed to the affirmative action issue, each passing or assisting executive orders that limit discrimination in the workplace. But affirmative action did not step into the educational landscape until 1954, when the renowned Brown v. Board of Education case ruled that separate but equal education violates the Constitution. It became the first time affirmative action policies could be considered in school admissions. Then over time, as colleges and universities started to integrate with society, admissions policies started to follow suit with the political ideology of affirmative action. These policies were trying to accomplish three goals. 1. Retribution for historically slighted people. 2. Creation of equal opportunity in education. 3. Creation of a diverse learning environment to enhance the educational experience of college. These three goals were put in place in order to end the cycle of poverty. Many impoverished people do not get sufficient public school education in order to be admitted into appropriate higher education programs. And this leads to them growing up and their children not be able to receive the proper education, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, these minority groups, who are largely impoverished, find themselves struggling to climb the socio-economic ladder due to the darkest parts of American history. Prejudice, racism, and segregation have left many minorities, most notably African Americans, in a hole which they cannot climb out of. Angered and frustrated, these minorities have passionately pushed for and defended programs like affirmative action. These arguments of race and racism, backed by historically discriminated people, make the issue of affirmative action a volatile issue. Arguments of black versus white are not exactly the sort of arguments that most people, let alone any policymakers, like to become involved in. Even today, the volatility of racial issues can be seen in cases like that of Ferguson. Despite the volatility and the discomfort, talking about these issues in an open and objective manner is a must if anything is to be resolved. Certainly, affirmative action is not a policy in which everybody is happy with, so there must be room for improvement.
One of the main arguments behind affirmative action is that because of racial segregation in the past, it is now much more difficult for minorities to find success in America. Affirmative action seeks to reverse this, and is actually doing a pretty good job.
In 2010, an identical percentage of white and minority students enrolled in college, which contrasts greatly with the 1982 statistic, where nearly 15% more white students enrolled in college than minority students. Many attribute this statistic to the efforts of affirmative action. In fact, the student body makeup of many universities around the United States now very closely represents the racial makeup of the population. Antonia Hernandez, the president of the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, reflects,
I'm a pretty bright individual, and I had decent grades. I was just dirt poor. I'm pretty sure I was judged by standards other than just grades or test scores. They saw in me a burning determination, the drive, the willingness to work. They gave me a break, but I was not the only one. It happened to thousands of Latinos who went to medical school or architectural school.
Affirmative action has truly provided success to minority students who would otherwise not be presented with adequate opportunities. However, recently there have been many objections to affirmative action policies in college admissions.
The These objections have taken form as Supreme Court cases in which students of racial groups which are not favored by affirmative action, often represented by the Students for Fair Admissions Coalition, have claimed in effect that the policies are a form of reverse discrimination. In the case of Regents of the University of California versus Bakke, the courts did not entirely agree with the claim of reverse discrimination. They have determined that race cannot be the determining factor of admission. However, it can be taken into consideration in the admissions process. They have also concluded that it is up to the states and universities to decide what policies are the best on an individual basis.
Affirmative action attempts to create a level playing field for all prospective students. However, many would argue that affirmative action policies give an unfair advantage to certain minority groups. In many cases, Black, Hispanic, and Native American students are benefited by affirmative action, regardless of socioeconomic standing, while white, Asian American, and Indian students are slighted by these policies. In a particular lawsuit against Harvard University, an Asian American student made the claim that Asian American students are held to a higher standard and are in essence forced to compete against each other instead of against all applicants across the board. In essence, affirmative action profiles students of certain ethnicities as being more privileged than others. Couldn't this easily be considered a form of racial discrimination? Should people of different ethnicities be held to different standards?
Even if it can be deemed acceptable to hold people of different ethnicities to different standards, at what point can we say that the playing field has been sufficiently leveled? If the goal of affirmative action is indeed to create equal opportunity and eventually equal social standing for minorities, when can we say this goal has been achieved? 8 states have already made the decision to ban affirmative action policies altogether. In the case of Michigan and California, the decision to ban affirmative action was the result of a voter initiative, though the decision was not without controversy. Though the Supreme Court ultimately upheld the state's ban, the case has raised questions as to who should be allowed to make policy decisions regarding affirmative action and how a proper consensus should be reached. In the case of California, a state with a 38% Hispanic population, the ban on affirmative action has had a significant effect on college admittance. UCLA in particular has seen a 40% decrease in the number of Latino applicants and a 35% decrease in African Americans admitted to the university. Though certainly not every university affected by recent bans on affirmative action have seen such a drastic decrease in minority admittance, cases like that of UCLA bring issue to the removal of affirmative action as a solution to this controversy. Rather than a ban, some universities set out to reform the policies. Universities in Washington, Florida, and California have instituted holistic policies which target socioeconomic standing rather than ethnicity. For example, some schools will accept students in the top 10% of their high school, allowing for students from similar backgrounds to be judged based on their relative performance. In any case, the future of affirmative action will remain unclear unless we are able to openly and objectively talk about the issue. Heated emotional arguments stemming from issues of race will only muddy the decision-making process. Though these issues are not very glamorous, though they make us uncomfortable, resolving these issues makes the difference between a viable solution and a lasting solution.
America's darkest moments should not be what defines us or confines us. We need to confront our issues of race so we can move past them, and from there, the fate of affirmative action will become clear.